If my wife was really on a trip, why did her gorgeous friend swear she hadn't seen her in a month? And why did my wife text me the same night like she was watching me from somewhere I couldn't see? My name is Nolan Price, and I have spent most of my adult life learning one ugly lesson. If someone wants to lie to you, they will usually decorate it with details you never asked for. Celeste had been doing that for weeks, smoothing her stories with little ribbons of logistics, acting like logistics were proof. She told me she was on a trip with Briar Lane, her gorgeous friend with the careful smile and the kind of hair that looked like it never met bad weather. Celeste said it like it was casual, like it was boring, like it was so normal it did not need scrutiny. I pretended to believe her, because I wanted to see how far she would take the performance before the stage lights burned out. The city was doing its winter routine, which meant the sidewalks were wet, the sky was low, and everyone walked like they had somewhere important to be, even when they did not. I had left a coffee roaster to her early, not because I disliked the place, but because the guide talked like a man being paid per adjective. I was stepping out into the cold air when I saw Briar near the entrance, leaning against a planter as if she belonged there. She was dressed too well for a casual afternoon, but not loud about it, which always reads like either money or practice. She looked up and met my eyes without surprise, and that tiny lack of surprise landed in my stomach like a coin dropped into a dry sink. I did not wave, because waving would have made it friendly, and I did not feel friendly. I walked closer with my hands in my coat pockets, letting my pace stay normal, letting my face stay neutral, letting my thoughts do their screaming inside my skull where they belonged. Briar's smile arrived right on time, like a trained employee greeting a customer, and I noticed how her gaze flicked once to my left, checking who might be watching. That was not a crime, but it was not nothing either. I stopped at a polite distance, close enough for conversation, far enough for denial. I told her I had not expected to see her here, and I watched her posture shift as if she had been rehearsing answers to questions that had not been asked yet. I said something light, something about the weather, because the weather is always the safest lie we share with strangers. Then I went straight for the bruise, because I was tired of circling my own pain like it was a museum exhibit. I told her, calmly and with a small, tired smile, that it was funny to bump into her now, because my wife had told me she was on a trip with Briar. I let the words sit there, not accusing, not pleading, just existing as a fact in the open air. Briar's smile held for half a second longer than it should have, and then it changed, tightening at the corners like a purse string pulled too hard. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. She told me she had not seen Celeste in a month. It was not dramatic the way people imagine betrayal, with voices and tears and shattered dishes, and maybe that is why it felt so clean. A clean cut is still a cut, and the blood still comes, but it does not give you the cheap comfort of chaos. Briar said it plainly, and she did not look away after saying it, which mattered more than the words themselves. I stood there, hearing my heartbeat in my ears, feeling the cold seep through my coat, and thinking about every little story Celeste had told me, every timeline she had offered with that sweet, patient tone, like she was teaching a slow student. I could have confronted Briar with my confusion, or demanded more details, or begged for context. But I did none of that. I did what I always do when a claim hits my desk at work, and the numbers do not line up. I watched the claimant's face. I listened for what they did not say. I gave them room to hang themselves, because most people cannot resist adding unnecessary thread to a lie. Briar did not add thread. She just repeated it once, steady and almost weary, and that weariness told me she had been dragged into something she did not like. I asked her, in a flat tone, whether Celeste had mentioned me recently. Briar hesitated, and that single hesitation was the first real evidence I owned. It did not prove the affair, it did not prove the trip lie, but it proved Celeste had been speaking about me in a context that made Briar cautious. I nodded as if none of it surprised me, because pride is a strange thing when your marriage is bleeding out in public. I told Briar it was fine, and I let a sarcastic edge slip into my voice, the kind of edge that keeps men from collapsing on sidewalks. I said maybe Celeste meant emotional distance when she said trip, because she had been taking that kind of trip for a while. Briar did not laugh, but her eyes softened just a fraction, and I logged that too. Then I did the one thing I knew Celeste would never anticipate from me, because it was not my style and it was not my morality. I asked Briar out, right there, in the cold, with traffic noise behind us and the smell of roasted beans drifting through the door. I made it sound casual, as if it was a spontaneous impulse, as if I was some bored man shopping for attention. I wanted the request to sit in Briar's mind like a stone, heavy and unmistakable. Her smile returned, but this time it was real, or at least real enough to be dangerous. She studied me for a moment, and I could almost see her deciding whether I was sincere, whether I was trying to punish Celeste, whether I was playing a long game or whether I was simply breaking. The truth was uglier than any of those options. I was still standing, which meant my instincts were awake. And when instincts wake up, they look for leverage even if the heart begs for mercy. Briar said yes, with that same careful confidence she wore like perfume, and she asked where. I named a place that was public and bright, because I was not looking for a secret, and I was not looking for a bed. I was looking for a witness who could not be coerced, a person who might tell the truth if the truth was finally asked for. Briar agreed, and she suggested a time, and her ability to suggest a time quickly told me she did not have to check with anyone for permission. That too was a small piece of the puzzle. We traded phone numbers, and I made sure she saw me save it without ceremony. I did not flirt. I did not compliment her. I did not try to win her. I let the situation do the work because the situation had teeth, and I was tired of being the only one bleeding. Briar's eyes flicked over my face again, searching for anger, searching for desperation, searching for something she could label as unsafe. I gave her none of it. I gave her the blank professionalism I use when I'm waiting for someone to reveal the real story behind the story. When we separated, she walked away with the easy grace of a woman who is used to being watched, and I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the wet pavement as if it could explain my life to me. The rational part of me tried to build a list right away. Celeste lied about being with Briar. Briar had not seen her in a month. Celeste chose Briar's name as cover, which meant Briar's name sounded believable to anyone who knew them both. The lie was designed for me, not for the world, because the world would not ask for proof. The emotional part of me wanted to sprint home and rip open every drawer, every closet, every hidden corner where marriage secrets go to die. I did not do that, because chaos makes sloppy men, and sloppy men lose. I walked to my car the way I always do, with a steady pace and a face that would not invite pity from strangers. I sat behind the wheel and let the heater blow air that smelled faintly of old coffee, and I stared at my phone like it might confess on Celeste's behalf. I did not call her. I did not text her. I did not ask where she really was. I did not accuse. Accusations are gifts when you have no proof, because they let the other person rehearse defenses. Celeste was already rehearsing, which meant she would be better at it than I wanted to admit. Instead, I opened a notes app and created a new entry with today's date. I typed the location, the time, and Briar's statement using plain language and no emotional adjectives. I wrote it like a claim report, because claims do not care about your feelings, and truth does not either. Then I saved it and closed the app, because obsession is another kind of weakness, and I did not want my hands shaking when I turned the key. On the drive home, I found myself noticing details I had ignored for weeks. The way Celeste's last trip story had included a boutique name that did not match her taste. The way she had mentioned traffic in a part of town she rarely visited. The way she had been unusually patient with me at dinner, as if patience was part of the script. When you love someone, you forgive their inconsistencies as quirks. When you suspect betrayal, those quirks become seams, and seams are where you start pulling. At home, the apartment was warm and quiet, and the quiet felt like a dare. I took off my coat and hung it carefully, because I needed my body to keep behaving normally even if my mind was tumbling downstairs. I washed my hands because I could not stand the idea of carrying the outside world's grime into this private wreck. Then I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the grain of the wood, letting my thoughts settle into something usable. My phone buzzed once, sharp and bright against the silence. It was Celeste, and the message was short, cheerful, and wrong in a way only a liar can manage. She asked how my day was, and she added a detail about the trip that Briar could never have verified. She wrote it like she was watching me from the other side of a mirror, trying to adjust her story to whatever I might have discovered. I stared at her message for a long moment, feeling my mouth go dry, and I realized she had no idea I had already met the one person who could break her whole timeline without raising her voice. I set the phone down without replying, and I opened my notes again, because tonight was not about love anymore. It was about facts, and facts were finally starting to show their teeth. I let Celeste's message sit on my screen like a stain that wanted attention, and I refused to scrub it for her comfort. My thumbs hovered, then backed away, because the fastest way to lose control is to start talking when you are still bleeding. I had learned that in my job, watching people talk themselves into contradictions, and I had learned it in marriage, watching silence get punished only when it was afraid. I set the phone face down, as if the glass could feel shame, then I stood and made myself a cup of tea I did not want. The kettle's small roar filled the kitchen, and I used it to cover the sound of my own breathing. When the tea was steeping, I opened my notes again and added one more line beneath Briar's denial. I wrote Celeste's message time, its tone, and the new trip detail she offered unprompted, because liars always volunteer proof, like they are tipping a waiter. I refused to label it as a lie in my notes because labels are emotions in disguise, and emotions make sloppy records. I wrote only what happened, what was said, and when it was said, because time is the one judge who cannot be bribed. Then I stared at the small list and felt something hard settle inside me. Not rage, but decision. I answered Celeste 10 minutes later, long enough to look normal, short enough to avoid suspicion. I told her my day was fine, I hoped she was resting, and I asked one simple question about her return date. I kept my words polite and flat, because flat words force the other person to shape the story themselves. If I sounded hurt, she would soothe me with rehearsed affection. If I sounded angry, she would paint me as unstable and call it self-defense. I needed her to keep building the lie without knowing I had already found the crack. She replied quickly, too quickly for someone supposedly out of town and relaxed. She gave me a date that did not match what she told me last week, and she tried to correct it in the same message like she was catching a typo. That kind of correction is a tell, because truth does not need to be adjusted mid-breath. I copied the return date into my notes, then I copied the correction too, because corrections are where lies get caught. I did not challenge her, and I did not ask for clarification, because clarification is an invitation to strengthen the story. The apartment felt smaller as the evening moved on, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I cleaned the counter, then I cleaned it again, because my hands needed work while my head tried to sprint ahead. I remembered how Celeste had been lately, how her kindness arrived on schedule, how her irritation appeared only when I asked basic questions, how her phone seemed glued to her palm like it was part of her skin. None of those things proved betrayal, but they proved distance, and distance is where betrayal learns to breathe. I had spent months excusing it as stress, because love always wants a harmless explanation. Now I was done feeding harmless explanations to something sharp. I sat at the kitchen table again and laid out the plan in my mind like a neat set of folders. First, I needed a baseline timeline that used only what I owned or what was public. Second, I needed a primary proof line, something firm enough that it could survive denial. Third, I needed 2 corroborations that were boring, because boring proof is the hardest to fight. Celeste's world was built on impressions, on being liked, on being believed because she sounded reasonable. I would not attack that world with drama, because drama is a gift to someone who lives on charisma. I would attack it with paperwork, timestamps, and witnesses who did not owe her anything. I pulled my laptop closer and opened the shared cloud album, because it was ours by design, and I had every right to look. The login was saved, the folder names were familiar, and the photos smiled at me like they had no idea they were weapons now. I did not scroll like a jealous man, hunting for skin and shadows. I scrolled like an adjuster, looking for patterns, gaps, and dates that did not belong. I checked the memories section first, because it likes to surface what people forget, and forgetfulness is a weakness even confident liars have. A memory popped up from a week Celeste claimed to be traveling with Briar, and the photo was not incriminating in the obvious way. It showed a table setting at a charity planning dinner, glossy program ink beside a metal spoon, a donor badge lanyard partly visible near a clutch purse. The lighting was warm, the scene was careful, and it looked like the kind of event Celeste would call work without blinking. I clicked into the details, because the details are where truth hides when everyone is busy admiring the picture. The date was clear, the time was clear, and the location tag was in our city, not on any trip. My stomach tightened, but I did not let it take the wheel. I took a screenshot of the metadata screen, not the photo itself, because the photo could be argued as reposted, reused, or old. Metadata is harder to laugh off because it is not trying to persuade anyone. I saved the file with a neutral name and moved it into a folder I created for this purpose, a folder with a title so dull it could put a thief to sleep. I wrote the screenshot's details in my notes, then I wrote the supposed trip date beside it, because the conflict was the entire point. The more I looked, the more I noticed how carefully Celeste managed what she shared with me. There were plenty of photos from her trip that showed scenery, drinks, and vague angles, but none showed Briar clearly, and none showed a location tag I could confirm. There were also small clusters of photos from our city during that same time frame, photos Celeste never mentioned, photos that looked like work but felt like hiding. The pattern was not a smoking gun, but it was a spine, and a spine is what holds a story upright. I needed something that would lock that spine into place. I checked our shared calendar next, because calendar conflicts do not care about romance. Celeste was the kind of woman who lived by invites, reminders, and meeting blocks, because her job demanded constant coordination. If her story was true, the calendar would support it, at least indirectly. I scrolled to the week in question and saw something that made my mouth go dry. There was a meeting block labeled vaguely, the kind of label people use when they do not want to explain, and it sat on a day she told me she was on the road. The invite's header included a location in our city and the name of an event venue I recognized from her charity work. I did not need to break into anything, and I did not need to guess. The calendar belonged to us both, and the conflict sat there in plain sight like a careless cigarette burn. I exported that week view into a PDF, because PDFs hold still, and I saved it in the same dull folder. Then I wrote the calendar block's details in my notes, including the start time and the location, because those two things were enough to anchor reality. I felt a grim satisfaction, not joy, because there is nothing joyful about discovering your marriage has been edited behind your back. Still, satisfaction has its uses, because it stops you from begging for answers from someone who is committed to hiding them. Celeste messaged again later, asking what I was doing, and she added another bright detail about her trip, like she was painting over a crack. I answered slowly, kept it mild, and told her I was home, handling small things. I asked how Briar was doing, as if it was idle curiosity, and I watched the typing indicator appear and disappear twice before she replied. She told me Briar was fine, she was tired, she was asleep, and she added a joke that did not sound like Briar's humor. Celeste did not know I had just spoken to the real Briar, and that ignorance made her bold. I wrote down the Briar claim anyway, because I wanted to see how Celeste used Briar's name going forward. If she used it freely, it meant she believed Briar was safe cover. If she avoided it, it meant she suspected something had changed. Either way, her behavior would inform my next steps. I did not tell myself I was doing this to punish her, because that would have been a lie too. I told myself I was doing this to protect the reality I lived in, because reality had been slipping away for months, and I was done living in a room made of her words. Around midnight, I left the kitchen and walked into our bedroom, where Celeste's absence had started to feel like a third person. Her side of the closet looked curated, and her suitcase was missing, which supported the trip story at a glance. I did not rummage through her things, because rummaging is what guilty people do, and I did not want to feel guilty. Instead, I looked for what was visible without trespassing. I noticed that 2 dresses were missing, both the kind she wore for public events, not the kind she wore for casual travel. I noticed her favorite heels were gone, and those heels were not made for airports or cobblestone streets. I stood there longer than I should have, letting the silence speak, and I realized I needed a witness who was not a device. Devices can be blamed, edited, or misunderstood by people who want to pretend. A person who speaks one clean sentence can be harder to erase, especially if they have no reason to lie. That brought me back to Briar, and to my invitation, and to the way her smile had looked almost relieved when I did not beg her for a scandal. Briar was not my lover, not my conquest, and not my revenge fantasy. She was a hinge, and I could feel the whole story turning on her willingness to open or close. The next morning arrived with gray light and a thin ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from sleeping without peace. I made coffee because it was easier than thinking about breakfast. Then I checked my phone for new messages. Celeste had sent a photo of a hotel hallway, cropped tight, no door numbers visible, no clues beyond generic carpet and bad lighting. It was supposed to reassure me, and it did the opposite, because reassurance that tries this hard is always suspicious. I replied with a polite comment and nothing else, and I waited for her to keep talking. While she talked, I worked. I logged the photo's time, I saved the screenshot, and I added it to the folder because every piece mattered, even the fake ones. I opened my bank app, not to spy on her, but to check what came from my own accounts, the ones she used for shared expenses. I scanned the merchant notifications and noticed a small charge from a venue bar I had never been to, a charge that landed on a night she claimed she was exhausted in her hotel room. The amount was not large, which was the point. Small charges slip through because people do not want to be petty. Petty is how you miss the truth. I did not confront her about it, and I did not freeze anything because I was not trying to win an argument. I was trying to build a ledger that could not be laughed away. I took a screenshot of the merchant alert. Then I wrote the date and amount beside the calendar conflict and the cloud metadata. 3 lines, 3 anchors, each boring on its own and lethal together. Then I looked at the growing list and felt something colder than anger settle into place. Celeste could deny one thing, maybe 2, but she could not deny everything without looking like a woman who either could not keep track of her own life or did not respect anyone else's intelligence. By midday, I had enough to know the trip was a costume, but not enough to know the full shape of the betrayal. I did not know who the lover was, and I did not know whether Celeste was being protected by someone with power, which mattered more than romance. People do not risk marriages just for feelings. They risk marriages for attention, escape, leverage, or the thrill of being untouchable. Celeste's job was built on public stories, and that made me suspect her betrayal was tied to a public arena too. The thought made my jaw tighten, because public arenas do not forgive quietly, and Celeste lived on being forgiven. Briar texted me that afternoon, confirming our plan for tonight, and I felt the strange calm of a man stepping into a trap he built himself. I told myself I would keep it clean, I would keep it public, and I would keep it focused on facts, not seduction. I also told myself, with a dry sarcasm that tasted like metal, that Celeste would deserve the panic if she ever learned where I was having dinner. Then I stopped thinking about what she deserved, because deserving is emotional, and emotion makes men stupid. I needed to be smart, and smart meant staying quiet until the right room had enough witnesses. As evening approached, Celeste called, and I let it ring once longer than usual before answering. Her voice sounded bright and practiced, and she asked about my day with too much interest. I kept my tone easy and gave her nothing, just vague answers, and I asked how the trip was going again. She described something that sounded like it came from a brochure, and she slipped in Briar's name with the casual confidence of a woman who believed her cover was still intact. I agreed softly, said it sounded nice, and ended the call without warmth or cruelty. When I put the phone down, I realized something that made my stomach turn, but also clarified my path. Celeste was not just lying to hide an affair, she was lying to test how much reality she could rewrite while I stood there smiling. That meant this was not about love anymore, and it was not even about sex. It was about control, and control is the one thing I refuse to hand over, even to someone I once adored. I grabbed my coat, checked the folder on my laptop one last time, and left the apartment with the quiet focus of a man walking into a storm he intends to survive. The restaurant I picked was bright enough to make lies look tired, and loud enough to keep confessions from turning into a scene. I arrived a few minutes early on purpose, because punctuality creates a quiet power in public places. I sat with my back to a wall, not because I feared danger, but because I hated surprises. The server brought water, and the glass sweated on the table like it already knew tonight was not about dinner. I watched the door with the calm patience of a man waiting for a storm to choose a direction. Briar came in like she belonged to the building, which is how certain people move when attention has never been scarce. She wore a coat that looked expensive without begging to be noticed, and her hair was pinned back in a way that felt deliberate. She scanned the room, found me quickly, and walked over with a smile that was warmer than it had been yesterday. She was not nervous the way an innocent bystander should be when she has stepped into married trouble. That told me she was either fearless or exhausted, and I suspected it was the second one. She greeted me with easy politeness, then sat down without hovering, as if we were old friends catching up. I noticed her eyes flick once toward the bar area, checking the reflection in the mirror behind it, and that small habit made my skin tighten. People who get used as cover learn to monitor rooms, because rooms are where stories die. I kept my face neutral, because my anger was not useful yet, and my curiosity was a sharper tool. I asked how her day had been, because small talk is a safe bridge to heavier ground. Briar gave a smooth answer, and I listened for effort inside it, the way I listen when someone repeats a rehearsed line. Her tone stayed steady, but her fingers tapped the edge of the menu once, then stopped. I filed that away as a hint of stress, and I kept my voice calm and plain. I said I did not want a scene, I did not want drama, and I was not asking her to pick sides. I watched her shoulders loosen a fraction, as if she had been bracing for a different kind of man. I told her I only needed clarity, because my wife's story had moved too fast. Briar looked at the table for a moment, then back at me, and her expression shifted into something more direct. She said, without quoting my wife or offering a performance, that Celeste had not just lied to me. Celeste had also used Briar's name in ways that made Briar feel dirty afterward. Briar explained it in simple terms, like someone describing a stain on a sleeve that will not wash out. I kept my tone light, because men who press too hard make witnesses retreat. I asked what Celeste had asked her to do, and I made sure my question sounded like logistics, not accusation. Briar did not answer immediately, which I respected, because hesitation can be decency. Then she said Celeste had reached out weeks ago, sounding cheerful and stressed at the same time, and she had asked Briar to cover a trip story if anyone asked. Briar had refused at first because she did not like being pulled into someone's marriage. Celeste had pushed again, framing it as harmless, framing it as needed, and framing it as a favor between friends. I felt something cold tighten behind my ribs, but my face stayed calm. I asked why Briar refused, and she said the request smelled wrong because Celeste was too specific about dates and too vague about reasons. Briar told me she had not seen Celeste in nearly a month because they had drifted, partly from busyness, partly from irritation, and partly from Briar's discomfort with being treated like a prop. That was the first time I heard Celeste described as someone who used people, not just someone who lied to me. It made the whole situation feel less romantic and more systemic, which was worse in a way that did not have a name. The server returned and asked for our order, and I chose something simple without looking at the menu. Briar did the same, and the quick decisions told me she wanted the conversation over with, not extended. When the server left, I asked Briar one more question, and I kept it narrow. I asked whether Celeste had mentioned any man, any event, any venue, or any charity function connected to the dates she claimed to be traveling. Briar's gaze sharpened, and that sharpened gaze confirmed I had finally stepped onto the real track. Briar said Celeste had mentioned a donor event, a planning dinner, and an urgent sponsorship meeting that supposedly could not be postponed. Celeste had framed it as professional pressure, something that required discretion and a flexible story at home. Briar did not say Celeste had described cheating, and she did not claim a physical affair. Still, she described the tone Celeste used, and that tone sounded like a woman covering a life she did not want examined. Briar added that Celeste had been strangely attentive to her phone during those conversations, as if she was coordinating with someone in real time. I asked Briar if she knew the sponsor's name, and I kept my voice casual, because names are radioactive when people feel cornered. Briar said she remembered hearing one name more than once, and it had stuck because it sounded like a brand, not a person. She called him Grant, and she said she did not know his last name, but she believed he was connected to the charity's vendor side. The name landed on my mind like a small weight. Not proof, but direction. I did not celebrate, because celebrations make you careless, and I needed to stay cold. I said I appreciated her honesty, and I made sure my gratitude did not sound like a bargain. I told her she did not owe me anything beyond truth, and I asked if she would be willing to provide one clean sentence later if it became necessary. Briar watched me for a long moment, as if she was measuring whether I was the kind of man who would weaponize her for entertainment. Then she said she would, but only if it stayed factual and only if it stayed public. She did not want to be dragged into private shouting, and she did not want to be framed as a jealous accomplice. That condition suited me perfectly, which made me almost smile. Private shouting is where liars regain control, because they can twist emotions into fog. Public facts are where control dies, because everyone can see the same lines at once. I told Briar that was exactly what I wanted too, and I meant it. I did not want revenge in the sloppy sense, because sloppy revenge backfires and becomes a story about the avenger. I wanted justice in the boring sense, the kind that reads like a ledger and ends like a locked door. When our food arrived, we ate like two people pretending to be normal, because sometimes normal is the only cover left. Briar asked me, indirectly, why I had invited her out so quickly, and I answered, without romance. I said I needed to know whether my wife's cover was built from real friendships or from borrowed names. Briar nodded, and her expression shifted into something I recognized from my own work, the expression of someone who has realized a pattern is forming. She asked whether I planned to confront Celeste, and I said I planned to document first, because confrontation without proof only teaches people how to lie better. Briar did not argue. Instead, she mentioned something small that made my spine straighten. She said Celeste had once joked about being untouchable at the charity because the director protected her, and she said it like it was playful at the time. Briar did not know the director's name, but she described her as powerful, polished, and obsessed with keeping donors comfortable. That description sounded like half the nonprofit world, but it also sounded like the kind of person who would control meeting minutes, narratives, and reputations. I asked if the director had ever interfered in personal drama before, and Briar said she had a habit of smoothing scandals until they disappeared. I felt the shape of the story shifting again, away from a simple affair and toward a machine that hid affairs as if they were clerical errors. That mattered because machines require different pressure than individuals. You cannot shame a machine, but you can jam it with documentation. I thanked Briar again and asked her to send me one short message later, confirming she had not seen Celeste in a month, with the date of our encounter. Briar agreed, as long as the message stayed simple and did not accuse Celeste of anything beyond the timeline. I nodded, because timeline truth is the kind of truth that does not need embellishment. We finished dinner without lingering, and I walked her to the sidewalk without touching her, because touch would have turned this into something else. Briar told me to be careful, not because she feared violence, but because Celeste was skilled at turning situations into stories. Briar said Celeste could make a calm man look cruel if she controlled the frame. I told Briar I had no interest in cruelty, and I meant it. Cruelty is noisy, and noise is where liars hide their hands. When Briar left, she disappeared into the crowd with practiced ease, and I stood under the restaurant's warm light spilling onto the wet pavement. The winter air smelled like exhaust and rain, and I felt strangely clear. I returned to my car and sat for a moment without turning the engine on. I opened my notes and wrote a summary of the dinner, careful to keep it factual. I added the new name, Grant, and the new concept, director protection, and I marked both as leads, not proof. My phone buzzed as I was typing, and the timing was so perfect it almost made me laugh. It was Celeste again, sending a photo of a hotel breakfast line, cropped to show only plates and a coffee station. She wrote a cheerful note about how boring the trip was, as if boredom itself could prove innocence. I stared at the photo and noticed the glossy program ink in the corner of the frame, barely visible, the same kind of ink I had seen in the cloud memory screenshot. The detail was small, but it was a slip, because it suggested she was near an event environment, not a generic hotel. I did not accuse her, because accusation would have been emotional theater. Instead, I replied with mild interest and asked whether she had enjoyed a quiet evening yesterday. Her response came fast again, and she described a calm night in the room, early sleep, and a long call with Briar. That last part was bold because Briar was now sitting in my reality, not hers. Celeste had no idea her cover had turned into a witness, and her confidence was building the gallows she would stand on later. I saved screenshots of the messages, then I drove home through streets that looked washed clean by rain. At the apartment, I opened the folder and added Briar's upcoming confirmation message as a placeholder line in my plan. Then I reviewed what I had. Cloud metadata showing a city-based charity scene during the trip week, calendar blocks tied to a local venue during the same dates, merchant alerts from my account landing on nights she claimed to be sleeping alone, and now Briar's factual denial and confirmation of the cover request. It still was not a full confession, and it did not need to be. It was a tightening loop, and loops do not require shouting to do damage. Before bed, I did one more lawful check that made my stomach turn again. I looked at the charity's public website and found the donor appreciation event schedule that was visible to anyone. There was a gala listed for later this month, a big one, the kind that attracts board members, sponsors, and local press. The event's tone was polished and self-congratulatory, which meant it would be obsessed with image. Image-obsessed rooms hate documented scandal because it makes everyone complicit by proximity. I stared at the date and realized I had less than 2 weeks to finish the ledger if I wanted the truth to land where it would hurt. Celeste called as I was shutting down my laptop, and I answered with a voice I barely recognized as my own. She sounded playful, almost flirtatious, as if she could feel distance and wanted to pull me closer with sweetness. She asked what I had done tonight, and I told her I had gone out for dinner alone. I did not mention Briar, and I did not mention anything that would trigger defensive scrambling. Celeste responded with approval that sounded too eager. Then she asked if I missed her. I said yes in the simplest way possible, because honesty about missing someone does not cancel the reality of their betrayal. After the call, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the building's quiet noises and feeling the lonely weight of my own restraint. I wanted to ask her why she did it, why she chose a cover story that involved other people, why she treated my trust like a disposable resource. Instead, I kept building the ledger because the question why is a swamp, and I needed solid ground. A minute before I turned off the light, a new message arrived from an unfamiliar number. The message was short, polite, and professional, and it referenced a donor appreciation meeting at the charity that my name had been added to. It included a time, a location, and a request for confirmation. I stared at it, feeling my pulse slow into something colder. Celeste had not mentioned adding my name to any donor meeting, and Briar had just warned me that the director liked controlling frames. I saved the message, wrote down the details, and let the phone rest on my chest like a small, dangerous weight. Somewhere in Celeste's world, someone had decided I needed to be in a room I never asked to enter. And if they wanted me in that room, it meant they already feared what I might bring with me. I did not sleep much after that donor meeting message, because sleep requires a belief that tomorrow will be familiar, and my life had stopped being familiar. The number looked local, the tone looked official, and the timing looked like a hand slipping a note under a locked door. Celeste had not mentioned adding my name to anything, and yet here I was, being invited into her public world like I was a prop in her set. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the building creak in the cold, and I kept thinking about Briar's warning that Celeste could frame any situation to make a calm man look cruel. I had no interest in being cruel, but I had every interest in not being made into a villain inside a story I did not write. By morning, the gray light felt like a verdict, and I moved through my routine with careful precision. I dressed for work, made coffee, and ate nothing because food tasted like paper when your stomach is full of suspicion. Celeste sent a message about her day starting early, sprinkled with cheerful details that sounded like she was reading from a brochure. I answered with the same polite flatness I had been practicing because warmth would invite her closer and closeness would tempt me into confrontation. Confrontation was what she wanted, even if she pretended she did not, because confrontation gave her something emotional to point at. I would not give her a scene, I would give her a record. At my desk, I opened the folder I had created and reviewed the pieces again, the way I would review claim evidence before a settlement call. I had the shared cloud metadata screen showing the city-tagged charity dinner during the supposed trip week, the exported calendar week PDF showing the venue-linked block during the same dates, and the merchant alert screenshot from my own account on a night she described as quiet hotel sleep. None of it was cinematic, which made it dangerous. People can argue with a story, but they struggle to argue with a date and a location that does not flinch. Still, I needed to be careful, because truth that lands in the wrong room becomes gossip, and gossip can be twisted into something uglier than a lie. The donor meeting message sat in my phone like a live wire, so I treated it like one. I did not reply immediately, and I did not forward it to anyone, because I did not know who was watching the thread. Instead, I searched the charity's public site again, following links anyone could follow, and I found a general contact email for donor relations. I sent a short, polite message from my own email, asking them to confirm whether a donor appreciation meeting existed with my name on it, and whether it was connected to the upcoming gala. I kept the language simple and neutral, because the goal was confirmation, not accusation. Then I saved the sent email with headers visible, because even an inquiry can become an artifact if someone later pretends it never happened. A reply arrived an hour later, and it was brief in the way institutions like to be when they are trying to stay out of trouble. They confirmed the meeting existed, they confirmed my name was on the list, and they suggested I speak directly with the board secretary for details. They included one name, Kira Holt, and a direct number. That was the first time the machine offered me a human being who could put something into official shape. I did not feel relief, because relief would have meant someone was helping me. Still, I felt a grim clarity, because now I knew where to walk. I left work early under the excuse of an appointment, which was not exactly a lie, because my whole life had become an appointment with reality. The charity building sat downtown in a renovated space with glass walls meant to signal transparency. Glass walls are always funny, because people put them up to look honest while doing the same private things everyone does. I walked into the lobby and saw a reception desk, a framed poster for the upcoming gala, and a small display of sponsor logos like a bragging wall. The air smelled faintly of espresso and fresh paper, and I could already picture how rumors would circulate in this kind of place, whispered in hallways, polished in meetings, then presented as concerns in official tones. Kira Holt came down from an elevator with a folder tucked under her arm and a practiced neutral expression. She looked like someone who had learned to survive powerful personalities by becoming unmovable. Her eyes flicked over me, registered that I did not belong to the staff, and still she did not look alarmed. That steadiness mattered. I introduced myself calmly, gave her my full name, and told her I had received a message about a donor meeting that included me, and I wanted to confirm details so I did not waste anyone's time. I made sure I did not mention my wife, because I was not here as a husband yet. I was here as a name on a list, and lists are where institutions lose their ability to pretend. Kira asked to see the message, and I handed her my phone without hesitation because confidence is easier to wear when you are telling the truth. She read it, then asked if I had requested to attend. I said no, and I let the word land plainly. Kira's mouth tightened just slightly, which was the closest thing to emotion she allowed herself. She told me she could verify my inclusion and clarify the purpose, but she would need a moment to check the internal schedule. I waited quietly, hands in my pockets, watching the lobby like a man observing a fish tank. A couple of staff members walked past and glanced at me with quick curiosity, and I could feel the first threads of gossip forming already. Kira returned and confirmed the meeting was a donor appreciation briefing connected to the gala, and my name had been added as a guest under Celeste Price's department. She did not say it with drama, and she did not ask why. She simply stated the fact like it was a line item, which made it more potent than any accusation. My pulse stayed steady because my anger was not useful in this room. I asked Kira what the meeting's format was, and she explained it would be a short review of the gala schedule, sponsor sensitivities, and public messaging, with minutes taken for board documentation. The words minutes and documentation turned something inside me from suspicion into intent. I told Kira I appreciated the clarity, and I asked one more question that sounded professional. I asked whether the director would be present because I had heard the director liked to set expectations directly. Kira's eyes sharpened a fraction, and she said yes, Daria Voss would attend. She did not add any commentary, but the way she said the name carried weight, like Daria was the kind of person who could end a conversation by raising an eyebrow. I had not met Daria, but I already knew her type. Narrative control dressed as leadership, warmth deployed as strategy, and a need to be the author of every room. Kira asked if I still intended to attend, and I said yes, because refusing would create a story I did not control. If I vanished, Celeste and Daria could paint me as unstable, jealous, or threatening. If I showed up calm and polite, they would have to work harder to frame me. Kira nodded and offered to email me the official invitation so the schedule was clear. I thanked her and watched as she typed quickly, her fingers moving with the speed of someone used to recording other people's chaos. When the email arrived, I saved it with the subject line visible because subject lines are the fingerprints of institutional intent. As I turned to leave, I saw Celeste in the hallway beyond the glass wall, walking with her phone in her hand and her smile fixed in place. For a second, I wondered if I was hallucinating her presence, because she was supposed to be out of town, and yet there she was in our city, moving like she belonged. She did not see me at first, and that gave me a clean moment to watch her without being watched. She wore one of the dresses I had noticed missing, and her hair was done in the sleek style she reserved for public events, not casual travel. She laughed at something on her phone, then tucked it away as she approached the lobby, her posture smoothing into professional charm. When she finally noticed me, her face flickered just once, a tiny glitch like a video stutter. Then her smile returned, brighter than before, and she walked toward me with the kind of confidence that only exists when someone believes they can talk their way out of anything. She asked what I was doing here, and her tone sounded playful, as if my presence was a cute coincidence. I felt a hot flash of anger rise, but I kept my voice calm, because calm was my weapon now. I told her I received an invite with my name on it, and I came to confirm details with Kira. I watched Celeste's eyes flick toward Kira's elevator as if she wanted to control that interaction retroactively. Celeste said she meant to tell me, then she said it was a surprise, then she said it was a donor relations thing, and the way her explanation stacked too quickly made my skin crawl. Truth does not pile up like that, because truth does not need padding. She asked whether I was upset, and the question was bait. If I said yes, she could soothe me and call it love. If I said no, she could claim my coldness as cruelty. I gave her neither. I told her I was only clarifying scheduling so I did not misstep, and I thanked her for including me. My tone stayed polite, almost bored, and I watched her lose grip on the emotional lever she expected to pull. She tried again by asking about my dinner last night, because she was fishing for Briar. I answered vaguely and said I ate out, then I asked a simple question in return. I asked how the trip was going, since she seemed to be back in the city already. For the first time, Celeste's smile faltered in a way she could not fully hide. She recovered quickly, claiming she had returned early due to work, and she spun it like sacrifice. I nodded as if it made sense and made no comment, because I wanted her to keep speaking. She added that Briar was exhausted and staying in, which was a bold reuse of the cover. I let the lobby noise fill the space between us like a curtain. Celeste's eyes kept moving, checking who might be watching, and I realized she feared witnesses more than she feared me. That fear was the clearest proof I had felt so far, even if it could not be printed. I told her I had to go, because I did not want to linger in a public space where she could later claim I caused a scene. Celeste touched my arm lightly, and the touch was both affectionate and strategic, the kind of touch designed to tell any observer we were fine. I stepped back gently, not jerking away, just creating distance, and I watched her register the move with a tight blink. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting, and the sting felt honest. I sat in my car and added the encounter to my notes, listing the time and place, and noting that Celeste was physically present in the city while still claiming a trip elsewhere. I did not write it like a hurt husband. I wrote it like a man documenting a contradiction in a file. Then I took a breath and decided the next step was not another private test. The next step was to let the institution's own need for order work against her. That evening, I reviewed the evidence again, and I forced myself to keep it minimal. One primary line would be the shared cloud metadata showing the local charity dinner during the trip week. The two corroborations would be the calendar conflict PDF with the venue-linked block and the merchant alert from my account on her supposed hotel night. Briar's confirmation would remain a witness line, a clean sentence I could call on later, but I would not lead with it. People accuse witnesses of bias, but they struggle to accuse their own calendar and their own billing notifications without sounding ridiculous. Celeste called late, acting as if the lobby encounter had never happened. She described her day in out-of-town terms again, and I listened with the quiet fascination of a man watching someone dig a hole while insisting it is a garden. I kept my voice gentle and asked how her meetings were going, and she offered a vague answer filled with names she did not define. Then she shifted, asking whether I would attend the donor meeting, and her tone sharpened with careful interest. I said yes, because my name was on the list, and I would not be the one who looked evasive. There was a pause, and I could hear her thinking, adjusting, recalculating the angle she would need. After the call, a message arrived from Briar, exactly as promised, short and factual. She confirmed she had not seen Celeste in a month and referenced the day I bumped into her. The message was not emotional, and it did not accuse anyone of cheating. It was simply a timeline fact from a neutral place, which made it priceless. I saved it immediately, then I took a screenshot with the timestamp visible, because screenshots are the modern equivalent of signing the back of a photograph. I added it to my folder as a supporting artifact, not as the center, because the center still needed to be institutional and boring. The next morning brought a new email from Kira, confirming the donor meeting time and noting that minutes would be recorded for board reference. I saved that email too, because it told me the room would have a record, and records are where liars suffocate. Celeste sent a cheerful message about packing her bags to come home tomorrow, as if her return was a sweet milestone. I replied politely and asked what time she would arrive, because scheduling is the kind of question that forces real answers. She gave me a time, then corrected it, then added a smiley detail about traffic, and I felt that familiar tightness in my jaw. The corrections were multiplying, and multiplying errors are what people notice when they finally stop wanting to believe. I sat at my desk that night with my evidence folder open, and I printed 2 pages, nothing more. One was the cloud metadata screenshot, and one was the calendar week view PDF with the conflict highlighted lightly in pen. I did not print the merchant alert yet, because I wanted to keep a third piece in reserve, like a spare bullet in a lawful gun. I signed the back of each printed page with the date and my initials, not because it was legally magical, but because it trained my mind to treat this like a record, not a tantrum. Then I slid the pages into a clear sleeve, labeled it with a simple date, and set it in my coat pocket like a quiet promise. Celeste texted again just before midnight, asking if I was awake and saying she missed me. I stared at the words and felt a brief, sharp grief, because part of me still wanted the old version of her to exist. Then I remembered Briar's tired honesty, Kira's neutral confirmation, and the way Celeste's smile had glitched when she saw me in that lobby. I replied with a polite sentence about being tired and told her to rest, because rest was the last kindness I could give without betraying myself. When I finally lay down, I did not feel calm, but I felt prepared. The donor meeting was not just a calendar event anymore. It was a test of who controlled the public narrative and who could survive documentation. Celeste had tried to keep the betrayal private, but she had also pulled me into her public arena without understanding what that meant. And now, I was walking into that arena with 2 pages that would not raise their voice, would not beg, and would not forgive a lie just because it sounded pretty. The donor appreciation meeting was scheduled for late afternoon, which meant the day crawled with the slow cruelty of anticipation. I went to work, answered emails, closed small tasks, and acted like my world was not balancing on a thin line of paper in my coat pocket. Every time my phone buzzed, my body reacted before my mind, because betrayal trains you to flinch at ordinary sounds. Celeste texted twice, both messages sugary and careful, both of them trying to feel like normal marriage chatter. I replied with polite brevity, because too much warmth would invite a sudden emotional audit, and too much coldness would give her a story to sell. By midday, she sent a photo that was supposed to prove she was still traveling, a shot of a highway sign blurred by motion and framed so tightly it could have been anywhere. The attempt was almost insulting, but I refused to let insult drive me, because insult makes people reckless. I saved a screenshot of the photo anyway, because fake proof is still proof of intent. Then I checked the weather app out of habit and noticed the sky in her photo looked clearer than ours, which meant she was either lucky or lying. And she was never lucky when it mattered. I did not challenge her, I just logged it and moved on. At 3 o'clock, I left the office and drove downtown, feeling the clear sleeve in my inner coat pocket press against my ribs like a reminder. The charity building looked polished in the afternoon light, glass and steel reflecting the city's gray. I parked 2 blocks away to avoid any chance of staff recognizing my car and giving Celeste a warning. The walk to the entrance felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because each step made the next scene inevitable. When I reached the lobby, the receptionist greeted me with that cheerful nonprofit brightness, the kind that says everyone is welcome as long as no one is inconvenient. Kira Holt met me near the elevator without wasting time on friendliness. She looked sharper than before, hair pulled back, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. She asked if I had questions before the meeting started, and I said no, because questions could be framed as demands. I told her I was here to listen and not disrupt. Kira nodded once, then guided me upstairs to a conference room that smelled like printer paper and citrus cleaner. The room had a long table, neat chairs, and a wall screen that looked ready to project optimism. Celeste was already there, standing near the window with her phone in her hand, her posture angled like she was performing calm. She wore a blazer that made her look official, and she smiled when she saw me, but her eyes tightened like she was checking for weapons. The irony almost made me laugh, because my weapon was paper, and paper does not look dangerous until it is too late. She walked toward me and kissed my cheek lightly, just enough to leave a public mark of normalcy. I accepted it without flinching, because flinching is the kind of behavior that turns into gossip before you reach the parking lot. She asked if I was excited, as if we were a happy couple entering a charity season together. I told her I was curious to understand the schedule, because I did not want to misrepresent anything to donors. The words were harmless, but they made her blink once, because they hinted at the only thing she feared: misrepresentation being named out loud. She recovered quickly and introduced me to 2 staff members with a practiced tone, presenting me like an accessory. I shook hands, smiled politely, and kept my body language relaxed, because relaxed men look credible. Then Daria Voss entered the room, and the temperature shifted without anyone acknowledging it. Daria moved like she had never waited for permission in her life. She was dressed in soft neutrals that looked expensive, and her smile was bright in the way a spotlight is bright. Not warm, just unavoidable. She greeted everyone with first names, including Celeste, and her voice carried the smooth authority of someone who believes the room belongs to her. When she reached me, she paused, held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, and said my name as if she was tasting it for weaknesses. Daria thanked me for coming and called my attendance a sign of support, which was both flattering and strategic. I returned the compliment with a polite line about appreciating the charity's work because it cost me nothing and it kept my tone neutral. Daria's eyes stayed on my face, searching for emotion, and I gave her none. She moved on, and the meeting began with the kind of upbeat agenda slide that makes people forget their own hypocrisy. Kira sat at the side with her tablet, ready to record, and I felt my pulse settle. Minutes were being taken, which meant stories would have a harder time breathing. Daria talked through the gala schedule, sponsor sensitivities, and messaging themes, using words like community and impact as if they were currency. Celeste contributed when prompted, sounding confident, sounding helpful, sounding like a woman who could never be messy. Grant Harlow arrived a few minutes late, and everyone pretended not to notice, because powerful rooms forgive what they want. Grant looked like he belonged in a glossy brochure too, with a clean suit, an easy grin, and a habit of scanning faces before he spoke. When he introduced himself, he used my name immediately, even though we had not met. That told me Celeste and Daria had briefed him, and it told me they expected me to be manageable. Grant spoke about sponsor expectations and vendor coordination, and his words were smooth, but his timing was sloppy. He mentioned a planning dinner that he framed as routine, and I caught Celeste's eyes flick toward him like a warning. I filed that flick away, because flicks are the real language of people who think no one is watching. Daria steered the conversation away from specifics, back toward safe themes, and I watched her do it with the ease of a woman guiding a leash. If Daria was controlling the narrative, she was doing it not by shouting, but by redirecting, which is a more sophisticated form of power. About 20 minutes in, Daria asked if anyone had questions or concerns before they closed the meeting. The room went quiet in the polite way people go quiet when they want to leave. Celeste turned slightly toward me, her smile small and encouraging, like she was telling me to behave. That was the moment I had been waiting for, not because I wanted drama, but because I wanted the record to capture truth at the exact moment the room was pretending everything was fine. I did not stand, I did not raise my voice, I did not announce betrayal. I simply asked one calm question, phrased like a scheduling clarification. I asked whether the charity's planning dinner that week had taken place on the same night the team believed Celeste was out of town, because I was trying to align my understanding of her availability with the event calendar. The question was polite, almost boring, and it forced everyone to choose between treating me as a supporter or treating me as a problem. Daria's smile held for a second, then her eyes narrowed slightly. She asked what I meant, and I repeated the question, still calm, still simple. Celeste's face tightened, and she tried to laugh lightly, saying it was confusing because she had traveled and worked remotely. Grant shifted in his seat, and Kira's fingers paused above her tablet, as if she sensed something important was about to be recorded. Daria glanced toward Celeste, then back to me, and her tone softened into that dangerous managerial warmth. She suggested we keep personal scheduling outside the meeting to respect everyone's time. I nodded as if that was reasonable, because I did not want to argue in the open. Instead, I reached into my inner coat pocket and pulled out the clear sleeve without rushing. I placed it on the table in front of me, flat, like it was nothing more than a handout. The plastic caught the overhead light, and for a moment the room looked at it the way people look at a small animal that might bite. I slid the sleeve slightly toward Kira, not toward Daria, because Kira controlled the minutes, and minutes controlled consequences. I told Kira in a steady voice that I had 2 public artifacts that clarified the date conflict, and I wanted them entered as received for the meeting record because my name had been included as a supporter, and I did not want misinformation attached to it. The phrasing was important. I did not say my wife lied. I said I did not want misinformation attached to my name. That made it an institutional concern, not a marital tantrum. Kira looked at Daria for half a second, then looked back at me, then reached for the sleeve. Daria tried to stop it with a gentle hand gesture and a smile, but Kira was already holding the plastic. Kira's expression stayed neutral as she slid out the first page. the cloud metadata screenshot showing the date, time, and location tag in our city. She scanned it quickly, then the second page, the exported calendar week view with the local venue block highlighted. Kira's eyes moved in small, efficient jumps, and I could see the moment she recognized the alignment of dates. Celeste's face had gone still, too still, the way a person looks when they are trying to keep their body from betraying their mind. Grant's easy grin had evaporated into a tight line, and his fingers tapped the table once, then stopped. Daria's smile remained, but it was now a mask under strain. She asked softly and with a hint of irritation what exactly I was implying. I did not take the bait. I said I was implying nothing beyond the dates shown on the documents, and I asked that they be noted as received because I wanted accuracy. I kept my tone almost apologetic because apology makes people hesitate before attacking you. Kira cleared her throat lightly and said she would note in the minutes that 2 documents were received regarding a scheduling discrepancy. She did not describe them in emotional terms, and she did not editorialize, which made the note even more lethal. Daria's eyes flashed, and she suggested a short recess to review the materials privately. Miles Arden, the facilitator, stepped in smoothly, announcing a 5-minute break as if it was routine. His voice carried a practiced calm, the kind that makes conflict seem like a technical glitch rather than a moral event. People stood, shifted, and moved toward the coffee station at the side of the room, pretending this was not the most interesting thing to happen all week. Celeste leaned toward me and spoke quietly, her tone controlled, asking what I was doing. I answered in the same controlled way, saying I was clarifying dates and protecting my name. She told me we could talk at home, and I told her home was where stories were easy to bend. Her eyes hardened, and she accused me softly of humiliating her. I almost smiled, because the room had not heard anything humiliating yet. The only humiliating thing was the fact that she was being forced to face her own dates. Daria approached Kira near the screen, speaking in low tones, trying to regain control. Grant hovered nearby, his face angled away from me, but his posture tense. I stayed seated, sipping water, looking bored, because boredom is my favorite disguise. If I looked vindictive, they could frame it as revenge. If I looked calm, they would have to deal with the content rather than my character. During the recess, Briar's name flashed in my mind, and I realized Celeste had built her cover with borrowed people and borrowed authority. Daria's presence was the borrowed authority. Grant's role was the borrowed glamour. Briar had been the borrowed alibi. My only weapon against that borrowed scaffolding was documentation that belonged to me and could not be owned by them. I felt the merchant alert screenshot waiting in my folder like a third card I had not played, and I decided I would not play it today unless they forced my hand. 2 documents were enough to crack the room. A third would be for the room that mattered more. The break ended, and Miles called everyone back with the gentle firmness of a man paid to keep messes contained. Daria resumed the meeting, but her tone had changed, less warm, more clipped. She stated that the charity took accuracy seriously and would review any discrepancy. She thanked me for bringing concerns forward and suggested that all further questions be directed to her office. It was an attempt to swallow the issue and move on. It might have worked if Kira had not already typed the words received regarding scheduling discrepancy into the minutes. When the meeting ended, people filed out with their polite smiles and their hungry eyes. Celeste stayed behind, her face tight, her voice low, telling me I was crossing a line. I told her she crossed the line when she wrote me into a story that did not match reality. Grant stepped closer, as if to intervene, then stopped when he realized I was not going to swing at anyone or shout. Daria watched from the doorway, her expression controlled, her gaze sharp, and I could tell she was already planning how to frame this as my instability. The problem for her was that instability does not look like printed dates, and the record now existed. Kira approached me with the sleeve in her hands and asked if I wanted a stamped received marking for my copy because she could provide it as a courtesy. Her offer was quiet, professional, and devastating. I said yes, because courtesy from the record keeper is the closest thing to justice you get before consequences start. Kira stamped the sleeve lightly, wrote the date, and handed it back to me. Celeste watched the stamp land as if it was a bruise forming on her skin. I thanked Kira, nodded to Miles, and left the room without looking back at Celeste. In the hallway, I heard the first whispers, soft and quick, because people love scandal when it is packaged as concern. The charity building's glass walls reflected my face as I walked toward the elevator, and I looked like myself, calm, composed, and slightly tired. That was the best revenge I could offer a woman who wanted a dramatic villain, a man who refused to perform. Outside, the winter air hit my lungs like a reset, and I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, listening to distant traffic and feeling the stamp through the plastic sleeve. Daria had wanted to control the narrative, and Celeste had wanted to keep the lie private. Instead, The record now held a simple statement. Evidence received. That was not the end. It was the opening of a door they could not close with charm, and I knew exactly which room I would walk into next. I drove home with the stamped sleeve on the passenger seat like a quiet animal that might bite if anyone touched it wrong. The city lights smeared across the windshield, and every red light felt like an extra 10 seconds for my thoughts to rehearse all the ways Celeste could twist today into a story where I was the problem. I did not feel triumphant, because triumph would have meant I enjoyed hurting her. I did not. I felt focused, because focus is what you cling to when your marriage turns into a courtroom without a judge. By the time I reached our building, my phone had already started to hum with the kind of subtle pressure that used to be reserved for office emergencies. 2 missed calls from Celeste, then a message that pretended to be calm but smelled like panic. She said we needed to talk now, she said I embarrassed her, and she said I had blindsided her. The order of her complaints told me everything. Not once did she say the dates were wrong. She did not argue the facts. She argued the feeling of being exposed, which is what guilty people do when they realize denial is a weak suit in a room with minutes. I parked, walked inside, and rode the elevator up with my jaw clenched and my shoulders loose. I wanted my body to look like it belonged to a man returning from a normal meeting, because normal is armor. When I opened the apartment door, the air inside felt tense, like the rooms were holding their breath. Celeste was waiting in the living area, still dressed like she had been on camera, blazer on, hair perfect, phone in hand. She looked like a spokesperson who had run out of talking points. The sight of her triggered something sharp in my chest, not because she looked beautiful, but because she looked prepared, and preparation is always aimed at someone. She started in immediately, fast and controlled, describing how inappropriate it was, how unkind it was, how I had made her look unstable in front of her director and colleagues. She used institutional language, which was an old trick. If she framed our marriage as a professionalism issue, she could make me the irrational spouse violating boundaries. I waited until she finished, because interrupting would have given her the only thing she wanted: my emotional noise. Then I told her, calmly, that I had asked one simple question and provided 2 documents. I said if those documents were inaccurate, she could correct them through the same channels, and I would welcome it. I watched her face for the micro glitch. The glitch came, quick and ugly, then she covered it with anger. She said the documents were being misread, the cloud memory could be old, the calendar block could be a placeholder, and she could explain everything if I would just stop doing this in public. Her word choice mattered. She did not say it was false. She said it could be explained. Liars love explanation because explanation is flexible. Truth loves plainness because plainness is not a negotiator. I asked, still calm, why she was in the charity building today when she told me she was out of town. The question was simple, and it stabbed directly into her story's soft tissue. She claimed she returned early, then she claimed she never said she was still away, then she tried to steer toward how stressful her job had become. I let her steer for a moment, because steering shows the shape of the lie. Then I asked the same question again, slowly, without sarcasm. She stopped talking for 2 full seconds, and those 2 seconds were louder than anything she said afterward. Celeste shifted tactics, which meant she was getting scared. She said I was acting paranoid, and she said my behavior felt like surveillance, and she hinted that if I continued, she would have to protect herself. The threat was soft, but it was there. It was the classic move: accuse the other person of the very thing you are doing, then claim self-defense. I felt a cold anger rise, not explosive, but clean. I told her, plainly, that I had not tracked her, hacked anything, or contacted anyone to dig for private information. I told her I used only shared access and public confirmations, and I asked if she wanted to claim that shared access was a violation. The question cornered her, because she could not call it a violation without admitting she had been hiding behind the convenience of marriage while using it to fund her secrets. She tried to cry, or at least her eyes tried to water, but it looked like performance, and performance makes me cruel in my head. I refused to comment on her emotion. I told her calmly that I was not interested in humiliating her in front of strangers. I was interested in accuracy because accuracy was the only thing keeping me from being rewritten into the villain of her story. I said the charity now had a record, that evidence was received, and that record existed because my name was placed on their list without my request. If she wanted to talk about blindsiding, she should look at her own invitation choices. Her phone buzzed, and she checked it without thinking, then realized I saw, then tried to pretend she had not. That reflex was the most intimate betrayal of all. A spouse who hides their phone hides their life, and a hidden life is not a marriage. She told me Daria was furious, and she said the director believed I was trying to sabotage the gala. She said Daria thought I was acting out because I could not handle Celeste's success. That last line was poisoned because it attacked my pride in a way designed to make me react. I almost admired the technique. Almost. I told Celeste, with a flat tone, that Daria could believe whatever she wanted, but she would have to deal with documents, not her fantasies. I said I was not sabotaging anything, I was refusing to be misrepresented. If Daria wanted to frame me as unstable, she would have to do it over a stamped sleeve and a recorded note. Celeste's eyes narrowed, and I saw the moment she realized the director's narrative control had hit a wall. That wall was boring paper, and boring paper is the one thing charming people never respect until it breaks them. Celeste shifted again, trying to bargain. She suggested we reset. She suggested counseling. She suggested a private conversation where she could explain the complicated situation she was in. I did not refuse those things emotionally, because refusing emotionally would have been satisfying and stupid. I simply said I was willing to discuss our marriage, but I was not willing to discuss it while she continued to lie about basic dates and locations. I asked her to tell me where she had been the last month, in plain terms, without layered stories. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, and what came out was a new version of the trip, not an admission. That told me everything I needed to know about the next phase. She was not ready to confess because confession would cost her status, not just intimacy. She was protecting something bigger than our relationship, or she believed she was. That made the affair feel less like a private sin and more like a professional ecosystem that rewarded secrecy. Briar had hinted at it. Kira had confirmed the machinery. Daria's fury now proved it. I went into the kitchen, poured myself water, and let the silence stretch. Celeste followed me, still speaking, still trying to regain control by flooding the air with words. Words are cheap, dates are expensive. I told her I would not fight tonight. I told her I was going to sleep in the second room and we could talk tomorrow when we were both calmer. She tried to block my path with a soft step and a pleading look, but I sidestepped without touching her because physicality would become another story. I walked away, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. In the quiet, my mind went back over the day with clinical attention. The meeting had ended with evidence received in minutes, which meant Daria could not erase it without looking like she was erasing it. The stamp Kira offered was a courtesy, but it was also a signal. Kira had chosen the record over the director's comfort, at least in that small moment. That meant the institution had a fracture line. I did not need everyone on my side. I only needed one person who could not be bullied into rewriting the truth. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not Celeste. It was a new email from the charity contact chain, and it was brief. It confirmed the minutes would be finalized and distributed to board members within 48 hours, and it reminded attendees that any corrections needed to be submitted in writing. I stared at that last line and felt the first real sense of leverage. Corrections in writing meant Celeste would have to choose between admitting the discrepancy and inventing a written lie that could be challenged. Written lies are harder to maintain because they leave fingerprints. I opened my laptop and pulled up my evidence folder, not to obsess, but to keep momentum. I added today's meeting email and the stamp photo I took of the sleeve. Then I created a simple ledger page with 3 columns: date, claim, contradicting artifact. I kept the language plain, almost dull, because the point was not to impress anyone. The point was to produce something that could be read quickly by a neutral person and understood without my emotional commentary. I added the cloud metadata screenshot as primary proof, then the calendar conflict as corroboration 1, then the merchant alert as corroboration 2. I had not used the merchant alert in the meeting, which meant I still had a clean escalation option if Daria tried to crush me through narrative. Briar's message sat in my phone too, her short confirmation that she had not seen Celeste in a month. I treated it like delicate glass. I saved it, backed it up, and recorded it as a witness line without inflating it. Witness lines can be attacked, but they also shift the psychology in rooms full of people who pretend everything is private. If a gorgeous friend becomes a neutral witness, Celeste loses the cover that made her story feel normal. Around midnight, Celeste knocked softly, then opened the door without waiting for permission, because boundaries are always optional for people who think they are right. She looked tired now, the polish slipping at the edges. She said she was sorry for how today went, but her apology focused on the consequences, not the truth. She said Daria was threatening to freeze her out. She said sponsors were sensitive, and she said Grant was furious because I had implied something about scheduling. Even now, she framed it as implication, not fact. She was still trying to keep the affair unnamed, like a stain that disappears if you do not look at it. I told her calmly that if her director and sponsor liaison were angry, it was because something in her story was unstable. If she wanted stability, she could stop lying. Celeste's face tightened, and she said I did not understand the pressure she was under. I told her pressure did not make people lie for a month and recruit friends as cover. Pressure makes people cut corners. It does not make them rewrite reality with a smile. She stared at me like she hated me for being calm, and that hatred confirmed the last piece I needed. She wanted me emotional, because an emotional man is easier to label and dismiss. A calm man forces the spotlight onto the documents. Celeste left without resolving anything, which was predictable. People who live on control do not surrender it in one night. After she left, I sat in the dark and listened to the apartment settle, and I made a decision that felt like swallowing ice. I was no longer trying to get a confession. Confessions are gifts, and she did not give gifts unless she received applause in return. I was building a route to consequence that did not require her cooperation. The gala was the true arena. It was public, it was image-obsessed, and it had people who cared deeply about reputations. If Daria was protecting Celeste and Grant, it would be because scandal threatened donations and power. That meant the only thing stronger than Daria's desire to hide was her fear of being recorded hiding. The meeting minutes were the first crack. The gala could be the collapse, but only if I timed it right and stayed lawful. The next morning, I received a short message from Kira, professional and cautious. She said she had attached the draft minutes for my review since I had submitted materials, and she asked if my documents were intended as a formal record submission or simply a clarification. The question was loaded, but it was also an opening. I replied in plain terms. I said the documents were intended as a clarification that should be noted as received, and I asked that the minutes include that phrase exactly, with no interpretation. I kept the email short, because long emails become arguments. Kira replied with one line, "Understood." That was all I needed to see. Kira was not my friend, but she was the kind of person who respected process. Process is how you kill a liar's story without raising your voice. Later that day, a merchant notification popped again from my account, another small charge from the same venue bar, and my stomach went cold. The timing matched Celeste's new work emergency block she had added to the shared calendar overnight, a block labeled vaguely like she was trying to cover her tracks in advance. I saved the alert, took a screenshot, and wrote the time beside the calendar entry. It was not just a past lie anymore, it was an active pattern. That meant the affair, or whatever machine was hiding it, was still running, even after the meeting. I stared at the screen, then at the stamped sleeve, then at the gala date pinned in my mind like a deadline. Celeste thought she could out-talk this. Daria thought she could out-manage it. Grant thought he could out-smile it. They all underestimated the same thing. Dates do not care who you are, and neither do receipts. I closed the laptop, put the sleeve back in my coat pocket, and walked into the living room where Celeste was pretending to scroll calmly through her phone. I looked at her for a long moment, then told her I would be attending the gala as listed, because my name was now part of the charity narrative, and I would not disappear to make things easier. She asked too quickly what I planned to do there, and her eyes flashed with something close to fear. I gave her the simplest answer I could, because simplicity is a knife. I told her I planned to be accurate. Her face tightened again, and I knew I had just forced the next move. If she tried to block me, she would look guilty. If she tried to include me, she would be inviting me into the exact room where her story could collapse in front of everyone she needed to impress. Either way, the trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for her to choose which kind of damage she preferred. The next 48 hours felt like a slow leak inside a sealed room because nothing exploded, but everything changed shape. The draft minutes arrived exactly when Kira said they would, cleanly formatted, professional, and calm enough to look harmless. I read them 3 times, not because I enjoyed the pain, but because pain makes you miss details the first time. The line was there, simple and brutal in its neutrality. Evidence received regarding a scheduling discrepancy. No adjectives, no conclusions, no pity, just the institutional acknowledgement that something real had been placed on the table. I saved a screenshot of the line, then saved the PDF itself, then printed one page and signed the back, because the habit of record-keeping was now the only stability I trusted. Celeste noticed my calm in a way that made her restless, because calm meant I was not begging her to rewrite my feelings. She tried a new approach that morning, shifting from anger to sweetness, offering coffee, asking about my day, touching my shoulder as if touch could erase timestamps. I accepted the coffee, refused the touch, and answered her questions with polite, empty words. She watched me like she was searching for a crack, because cracks are where she could pour a story that made her look like the victim. When she did not find one, her voice sharpened again, and she started talking about how people at the charity were concerned about me. Not concerned about the discrepancy, not concerned about accuracy, but concerned about me, as if my presence was the problem. It was classic frame control, and she was clinging to it like a life raft. By lunchtime, the charity's social machine started to hum louder. A mutual acquaintance, someone who used to invite us to small donor dinners, messaged me with careful phrasing and a heavy implication. They said they heard I was having a hard time, they hoped everything was okay, and they gently suggested I keep private matters private. I read the message, felt my jaw tighten, and recognized the technique immediately. That message was not concern. It was a boundary marker, a soft warning from the tribe that my behavior was making them uncomfortable. Celeste had already begun spreading a version of events where I was unstable, because instability is easier to pity than deceit is to confront. I replied to the acquaintance with one clean line, thanking them and saying I appreciated accuracy and process. I did not mention Celeste. I did not mention evidence. I did not mention betrayal. I kept it bland enough to bore them, because boredom is how you starve gossip. Then I took a screenshot of the message thread and saved it in my folder, because it was proof of the rumor pipeline turning personal discomfort into social pressure. If Celeste later claimed she never tried to smear me, this was an early smoke signal. That afternoon, I drove past the venue bar again, the one that kept showing up in my merchant notifications like a recurring bruise. I did not go inside, because I did not need a confrontation and I did not need a scene. I simply wanted to see the place in daylight, to understand why Celeste chose it, and to confirm it existed where the receipt claimed it did. The venue sat on a corner with frosted windows and a sign that looked expensive without being tasteful. People came and went with the hurried confidence of those who believed their lives were private just because the street was busy. I stayed in my car for 2 minutes, wrote down the address, then drove away, because my goal was not to catch her in the act. My goal was to make sure every piece of my ledger pointed to a real place in the real world. When I got home, Celeste was on the couch with her phone in her hand, scrolling with the tense focus of someone reading reactions. She looked up quickly, and her expression did the small, careful adjustment she always made when she wanted to look innocent. She asked where I had been, and her tone tried to sound casual, but it carried an edge. I told her I had run errands. She asked which errands, and the question landed wrong, because spouses do not cross-examine errands unless they are hiding their own. I gave her a vague answer, then I asked one simple question in return. The same question I kept asking in different forms. I asked whether she intended to submit a written correction to the minutes if she believed the discrepancy was false. Celeste's face tightened, and she said Daria would handle it, because Daria knew how to deal with situations like this. The phrase situations like this made my stomach turn, because it treated truth like a public relations problem. I asked what correction Daria planned to submit, and Celeste said she did not know yet because everything was complicated. Complicated was her favorite word now, because complicated makes lies sound like misunderstood truth. I told her, calmly, that written corrections were not complicated because they require specific facts. Celeste stared at me for a moment, then looked back down at her phone as if my calm was a physical irritant she wanted to scratch off. That night, I went back through our shared calendar with fresh eyes and found something new that made my pulse slow. Celeste had added a block for the day of the gala labeled sponsor coordination, and she had marked it as private, which was a childish move in a shared space. Marking it private did not remove it. It only signaled she wanted it unseen. The start time overlapped with the gala's early arrival window, and the location field was blank. Blank location fields are a liar's best friend because they let you claim you were anywhere. I took a screenshot of the calendar header and saved it, because the act of hiding is itself an artifact, especially when it happens after evidence enters minutes. A message popped up while I was saving the screenshot, and it was from Briar. She asked, in a cautious way, whether things were getting ugly because she had heard Celeste was saying I had become controlling. The word controlling was the one Celeste would choose because it was the cleanest knife. If she could label me controlling, she could justify everything as self-protection and rewrite her lies as survival. Briar said she did not believe it, but she wanted to know what was happening before Celeste used Briar again. I kept my reply simple, telling Briar I was staying lawful, staying factual, and staying public when needed. I thanked her for warning me, and I saved the thread, because it showed Celeste was expanding her smear beyond the charity circle and into her personal cover network. The next morning, Kira emailed again, and her tone was measured, but there was a subtle stiffness in the phrasing. She said the director's office requested a revision meeting regarding the minutes, and she wanted to confirm whether I had any objections to the received note being removed for clarity. The phrase for clarity was a lie dressed as professionalism. Removing the note would not clarify anything, it would erase the only institutional acknowledgement that mattered. I felt a quick surge of anger, then I swallowed it, because anger in writing is a gift to someone who wants to frame you. I replied with one sentence that left no room for interpretation. I said I objected to the removal and requested the minutes retain the phrase evidence received because the documents had been physically accepted during the meeting. Then I added a second sentence, polite and surgical, asking that any revisions be documented as amendments rather than deletions to preserve accuracy. I did not accuse Daria. I did not accuse Celeste. I simply requested process. Process is how you trap a narrative controller without raising your voice. Kira responded within an hour, and her reply was short enough to be a signal. She said she understood and would proceed accordingly. That was the second time she used that exact word with me, and repetition from a record keeper is rarely accidental. She was telling me she would not be bullied into erasing a received entry, at least not without a fight she could justify. I saved the email chain with headers visible and printed it, because email headers are the closest thing to fingerprints modern institutions allow. That afternoon, Celeste changed again, slipping into the persona she used when she wanted to look like the bigger person. She told me she had been under pressure, she told me Daria was threatening her job security, and she told me Grant believed I was trying to destroy his reputation. She said this with a kind of wounded dignity, as if the consequences were unfair rather than inevitable. I listened without interrupting, then I asked the one question that always brought her back to the cliff edge. I asked why Grant's feelings mattered to her enough to risk our marriage. She stared at me, and for a second her face looked blank, like she had forgotten which story she was supposed to be telling. She recovered quickly, claiming Grant was just a vendor contact, and she said the charity could not afford sponsor drama. I nodded, then asked why she had used Briar's name as cover, if this was only vendor stress. Celeste's mouth tightened, and she said I was twisting everything, and she said I needed therapy. Therapy is another common weapon, because it reframes the truth seeker as mentally unwell. I told her calmly that therapy was fine, but therapy would not change timestamps. Celeste stood up abruptly and went into the bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I did not follow, because following would have created the exact picture she wanted to paint. Later that night, I saw the first public move Celeste made that crossed from private manipulation into social framing. She posted a vague, glossy message on her public profile about protecting peace and setting boundaries with someone who had become unpredictable. She did not name me because she was smart enough to avoid defamation, but she did not need to name me. Our circles were small, and the people she needed to influence would connect the dots without effort. The post gathered supportive comments within minutes, the kind that praise strength while ignoring facts. I watched it with a cold calm that surprised even me, because the post was not evidence of my wrongdoing. It was evidence of her strategy. 10 minutes later, the post disappeared. That deletion was the slip I needed. Deleting a public post does not erase its existence from the people who saw it, and it does not erase the impact of the first reactions. I opened my phone's notification history, found the cached preview, and took a screenshot showing the post snippet with the time. I saved it in my folder because it captured both her framing attempt and her sudden retreat. Retreats happen when someone realizes their public mask is now under scrutiny. I did not need the full post content. I needed the proof that she attempted to pre-frame me as unstable right after minutes were challenged. The next day, a different kind of pressure arrived, sharper and more personal. Celeste's mother called me, not in anger, but in that gentle tone older women use when they are trying to keep peace while choosing a side. She asked if everything was okay, and she said Celeste seemed stressed and said I had embarrassed her at work. The word embarrassed was now traveling through family channels, which meant Celeste had decided to recruit sympathy in the one place it is hardest to fight: parents. I did not attack Celeste to her mother, because attacking would have made me the villain instantly. I simply said we had a scheduling discrepancy that had become public because my name was included, and I was handling it through process. I kept the language boring. Boring language keeps parents from panicking, and it keeps liars from weaponizing your tone later. After the call, I wrote down that family pressure had started, and I felt the story narrowing into its final corridor. Celeste was building a social shield with soft words and vague posts, while Daria was trying to erase the institutional record quietly. Grant was hiding behind sponsor language and hoping charm would keep him clean. The gala was days away, and it was the one place where all three of them needed the same thing: a flawless public face. That meant the gala was also the one place where a clean evidence ledger could become a blade. That evening, another email landed in my inbox from the charity, a polished message about gala logistics and seating assignments. I opened it slowly because my body already expected sabotage disguised as organization. The seating chart attached was neat, alphabetical, and officially cheerful. Then I saw my name placed at a table near the stage, directly beside Celeste and across from Grant Harlow, as if someone had arranged a quiet triangle on purpose. It was too perfect to be accidental, and the confirmation made my skin go cold. They were not just managing optics anymore, they were positioning me. I saved the seating chart, printed the page, and stared at the triangle they built for me without asking. And then my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number, short and polite, saying my gala badge might be delayed due to a processing issue, and they would update me soon. The badge delay message sat on my screen like a polite shove, the kind that pretends it is helping while it nudges you toward the exit. It came from an unknown number, and the wording was clean and professional, which meant it was either real staff or someone copying staff tone. The message said my gala badge might be delayed due to a processing issue, and they would update me soon. Processing issues do not happen by accident 2 days before a gala, not when money is watching and reputations are dressed in formal wear. I did not reply to the number because replying would give them a live thread to shape. Instead, I took a screenshot, captured the time, and saved it beside the seating chart like matching fingerprints. I opened the gala logistics email again and checked the attachments for anything else that looked like a quiet trap. The seating chart still placed me beside Celeste and across from Grant, like a staged photo waiting to happen. I zoomed in and noticed a small line near the bottom about badge pickup windows, and it listed a desk location inside the venue lobby. That meant if my badge was delayed, I would be stalled in public, visible, and easy to frame as disruptive. I could already hear Daria's voice calling it a security concern, as if security was a neutral word instead of a weapon. I called Kira directly, because Kira was the record keeper, and record keepers hate ambiguity. She answered on the second ring with a tone that sounded like she had been expecting me, which did not comfort me. I told her calmly that I received a message about a badge delay and I wanted to confirm my pickup status through official channels. I made sure my voice stayed polite and boring, because boring people do not get labeled as threats. Kira paused, then asked me to forward the message to her email, because she wanted to verify the number. That request was a gift because it made the issue official without me sounding accusatory. I forwarded it immediately and saved the sent email with headers visible, because headers are where truth hides when people lie in meetings. Kira called back 10 minutes later, and her tone had tightened by a fraction. She said the number was not a standard staff line, and she could not confirm it as authorized. Then she said something worse, still in that neutral voice. She said my badge was marked as pending review, and the request came from the director's office. She did not say Daria's name, but she did not need to. Pending review is what institutions say when they want time to invent a justification. I asked calmly, what policy trigger applied, because policy is the only language people like Daria respect when it is written down. Kira said she could not speak for the director, but she could request a written clarification and attach it to the file. I told her I wanted that written clarification, and I wanted it today. I said it was not about ego, it was about accuracy, because my name was placed on the guest list, and I had planned accordingly. I asked Kira to confirm by email that my badge status was changed by the director's office and that I requested the written basis. Kira hesitated for half a second, then agreed. That half second told me she knew exactly what game Daria was playing, and she did not like being forced into it. While I waited, I opened my evidence ledger and added a new line. Badge status changed, unknown number used, director office involved, written basis requested. Then I added a second line for my own protection. I remained calm, I requested policy, I stayed in official channels. People like Celeste and Daria do not attack the facts first. They attack the person presenting them. If I could show I stayed process-driven, their story about me being unstable would look thin. Celeste texted an hour later, as if she could smell the problem through the walls. She asked if I had seen the seating assignment, and she said she hoped we could show unity for the donors. That phrase made my teeth clench because unity was what she wanted on camera, not what she wanted at home. I replied with one sentence, saying I saw the seating and I planned to follow the official schedule. Then I asked her if she knew my badge was marked pending review. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then appeared again, and her reply landed with rehearsed innocence. She said she did not know, she said it must be a mistake, and she said she would ask Daria. The moment she mentioned Daria by name, I knew it was not a mistake. Mistakes do not have powerful owners. Briar reached out later that afternoon, and her message was cautious and direct. She said she heard from a mutual contact that the charity believed I might cause a scene at the gala. The rumor was now being sharpened into a safety narrative, which is the easiest way to justify exclusion without looking cruel. I thanked Briar for the warning and asked simply, who said it first? Briar said she did not know who started it, but she heard Daria's name attached to the concern. That was enough. If Daria was pushing a safety frame, she was doing it because she feared the ledger more than she feared embarrassment. Kira's email arrived before dinner, and it was short, formal, and carefully phrased. She confirmed my badge status was marked pending review at the request of the director's office, and she said she had requested written clarification of the policy basis. She did not add opinions, but the fact she put it in writing was an act of quiet courage. I saved the email, printed it, and signed the back like I had done with the others, because patterns matter. Then I replied, thanking her and asking one more surgical question. I asked whether the pending review would be documented in the gala operations log, because any restriction should have a trace. I kept the language respectful, but the meaning was clear. If Daria wanted to block me, she would have to do it on paper, not with a rumor and a random number. That night, Celeste came home later than usual, and she moved through the apartment like someone trying to look casual while carrying a secret. She told me Daria was stressed, sponsors were nervous, and the gala could not handle distractions. Then she asked softly whether I could skip the event for her, as if she was asking for a small kindness. I looked at her and felt the old grief flash again, quick and sharp, because a part of me still wanted to protect her. Then I remembered the minutes, the stamp, the deleted post, and the badge hold. Protection was what I had been doing for months, and it had only made her bolder. I told her I would not skip because my name was on the list, and I would not accept a silent removal. I said if there was a concern, it should be stated in writing with a policy basis, and I would respond in writing too. Celeste's face hardened, and she said I was making this into war. I told her she made it into war when she used borrowed names and borrowed power to control the truth. She tried to step closer, her eyes glossy, her voice softer, but I could hear the calculation under it. I stepped back. Not dramatic, just enough to keep the moment clean. Later, when she went to shower, her phone lit up on the counter with a notification preview, bright and accidental. I did not touch it, and I did not open anything because I would not cross that line. Still, the preview showed one word that made my stomach drop. Incident. The sender name was not saved, and the rest of the message was cut off, but the timing was too perfect. An incident is exactly what Daria would manufacture if she needed a policy reason to block me. I took a photo of the lock screen preview from a distance, capturing only the word incident and the time, because even a fragment can prove intent when matched with later documents. I sat at the kitchen table afterward, staring at my growing ledger, and I realized Daria was not just protecting Celeste. Daria was protecting herself, because only someone with personal risk would push this hard, this fast, and this quietly. The gala was no longer just a stage for my marriage. It was a stage for whoever had been hiding behind Celeste's smiling professionalism. If Daria could keep me out, she could keep the room clean. If she failed, the room would finally see what she had been editing. My phone buzzed again near midnight, and this time it was an email from the charity domain with a new subject line, Venue Security Note. The first line said there had been a concern raised regarding my attendance, and they needed me to confirm a call in the morning before badge pickup could proceed. I read it twice, felt my pulse slow, and saved it as the newest piece of paper they were trying to use like a leash. The Venue Security Note email tried to sound routine, the way institutions make threats smell like paperwork. It said a concern had been raised regarding my attendance, and I needed to confirm a call in the morning before badge pickup could proceed. I read it twice, not because the words were complex, but because the intent was. This was the pivot from rumor to procedure, the point where Daria could stop whispering and start pointing at policy. If I handled it wrong, I would become the distraction they warned about. If I handled it right, the policy leash would snap in full view. I did not reply at midnight because late replies look reactive, and reactive people get labeled. I saved the email with headers visible, added it to my ledger, and wrote one sentence beneath it on paper. The institution initiated a security frame in writing. Then I slept in short slices, waking every hour as if my body was running drills for a disaster. When morning came, the air felt too bright for what was happening, like the world had terrible taste in lighting. At 9, the call came from a number that matched the charity's main line, not an unknown thread. A man introduced himself as Venue Security Liaison, and his tone was careful, neutral, and exhausted, like he had been given a script and told to keep it clean. He said a concern existed about potential disruption, and he asked if I could confirm that I would remain respectful and follow staff direction. The question was designed to trap me into either sounding defensive or admitting guilt. I answered in the calmest tone I could manage and confirmed I intended to remain respectful and follow staff direction, because that was already true. Then I asked one question that turned the script back on him. I asked what documented basis existed for the concern, and whether it was attached to any specific incident report, policy line, or written complaint. There was a pause, and the pause told me he had not been given that detail. He said the director's office raised the concern, and the venue simply wanted to prevent problems. I said I understood prevention, but I did not consent to vague insinuations attached to my name, and I asked him to provide the policy basis in writing. I kept the words plain and professional, because anger would have given him a reason to end the call and call it volatile. He said he would ask for clarification and get back to me. Before he hung up, I asked him to confirm one more thing, the simplest stake in the ground. I asked him to confirm I had not been accused of violence, threats, or criminal behavior, only potential disruption. He confirmed it, and I wrote that confirmation down immediately, including the time, because spoken clarification becomes useful when written later. I forwarded my notes from the call to Kira in a short email, stating only facts and requesting that any security hold be documented in the operations log with a policy basis. I used Kira's language, because record keepers respond to their own vocabulary. I did not mention Celeste. I did not mention Daria directly. I said the director's office initiated a hold, the venue requested my compliance, and I requested written basis. Then I attached the venue security note email as a PDF and saved the outgoing message with headers. If Daria wanted to paint me as unpredictable, she would now have to paint it over a paper trail that made me look boring. Celeste hovered all morning like a polished ghost. She tried to sound casual while asking whether I had spoken to security, and her eyes were too bright, too alert, the way eyes look when someone is waiting for a story to land. I told her I handled it through official channels and requested written clarity, nothing more. She sighed as if I was exhausting her, then warned me that donors were nervous and Daria was furious. She said it as if donors were a sacred species and Daria was weather. I asked Celeste calmly why Daria was so invested in blocking me if the discrepancy was truly harmless. Celeste's mouth tightened, and she said I was turning everything into conspiracy. I told her conspiracies require secrecy, and this was happening in email threads with subject lines. Then I walked away, because every extra minute in a domestic argument was another chance for her to harvest my tone and sell it. By early afternoon, Kira replied with a single sentence that felt like a small door opening. She said the venue liaison requested written basis from the director's office, and she would document any restriction as an operational note. I read it twice, then printed it, then signed the back, because my habits had become my spine. I added one more line to the ledger. Record keeper agrees to document restriction. Documentation was the one thing Daria feared, because documented restriction implies documented motive, and motive is where powerful people get hurt. An hour later, the venue liaison called again. His tone was slightly stiffer, like someone who had been told to stay on message. He said the director's office could not provide a detailed written basis at this time, but they requested that my badge be held at will call and released only after an in-person check-in with the director's representative. That was the trap. An in-person check-in meant a public stall, a chance to frame me as confrontational, a chance to create the incident Celeste's lock screen preview hinted at. I kept my voice steady and said I was willing to check in, but I requested that the check-in be witnessed by the board secretary and logged as a neutral operational step. I used the word neutral twice, because neutral is the one adjective institutions cannot insult without exposing bias. He hesitated, then agreed to relay the request. I thanked him, ended the call politely, and immediately emailed Kira, asking her to be present at will call or to assign a delegate, and to type an operational note live if any refusal occurred. I was not asking her to take sides, I was asking her to do her job in daylight. If she refused, I would still proceed, but if she agreed, Daria's room for manipulation would shrink. Briar messaged me later, saying she was attending the gala with another committee guest and asking whether I needed her as a witness. The offer landed like a strange mercy. I told her yes, but only for one clean sentence, if required, and only in a public context with no private arguing. Briar replied that she understood, and she said she was tired of being used as cover for someone else's mess. I saved the thread because it showed willingness without hostility, and it proved I was not recruiting a dramatic accomplice. I was recruiting a neutral anchor. As evening approached, I prepared like a man preparing for a storm that would be called a celebration. I dressed in a suit that looked ordinary enough to avoid attention, but sharp enough to avoid pity. I placed the stamped sleeve and the printed emails into a slim folder and labeled it with the date in plain ink. I printed one more page, my one-page ledger summary, dates and artifacts aligned without commentary. No poetry, no rage, just dates, locations, and receipts. I signed the back and slid it behind the others, because the final room would punish over-explaining and reward clarity. At the venue, the lobby glowed with warm lighting and fake sincerity. Staff moved quickly with headsets and practiced smiles, and donors drifted in like they owned the air. I walked toward will call with a steady pace, feeling eyes flick toward me, then away, as if my existence was already a rumor. Celeste appeared near the entrance with Daria at her side, both of them smiling for the room, both of them watching me without looking like they were watching. Grant stood behind them, laughing too loudly at something a sponsor said, his confidence brittle at the edges. The will call attendant checked my name and said my badge was not ready yet, the phrase delivered with rehearsed politeness. I asked for the director's representative as requested, and I asked for Kira or her delegate to be present for the check-in. The attendant's smile wavered for a second, then she nodded and made a call. I stood there calmly, hands relaxed at my sides, and I let the waiting crowd see only a man following procedure. My heart was steady, not because I felt safe, but because I had built the only safety left, the record. Kira arrived from the side corridor with her tablet already open, and she took her place beside the will call counter without greeting anyone. Daria's representative arrived seconds later, not Daria herself, but a staff manager with the nervous face of someone sent to do dirty work politely. The manager asked me to step aside for a quick conversation, and I said I would speak right here, because will call was already the designated check-in point, and I wanted it logged as operational. Kira's fingers hovered over her tablet, ready to type, and I saw the staff manager's jaw tighten. The manager leaned closer and said the director had concerns about disruptive behavior, and they needed assurance I would not confront staff or guests. I answered with the same steady line I had used all day, confirming I would remain respectful and follow staff direction. Then I asked whether the director was claiming I had threatened anyone, and I asked her to state the answer clearly for the operational note. The manager hesitated, then said no threats had been reported. Kira typed, and I watched the words appear on her screen like a small, irreversible wound in Daria's plan. Then the manager said something that made the lobby noise feel suddenly far away. She said the director requested that I not be seated at the assigned table and that my seat be moved for guest comfort. It was not a ban, but it was a public demotion designed to isolate me, to make me look like a problem being managed. I nodded slowly, as if I was considering it, and asked one final question that turned the whole lobby into a listening room. I asked who exactly was uncomfortable and why my name was placed beside Celeste and across from Grant in the first place, if comfort mattered so much. Kira's typing stopped for a fraction of a second, and behind me, a familiar female voice cut through the lobby chatter, steady and clear, announcing she could answer one thing about Celeste's timeline, because she had not seen her in a month. Briar stepped into view beside the velvet rope, dressed for the gala, face calm, eyes tired of games. She did not raise her voice, and she did not look at Celeste for permission. She simply repeated the same factual line she had already given me in writing, and the lobby air changed because it was no longer just my claim. The staff manager stiffened, and Daria's smile across the lobby tightened like it was stitched on. Celeste moved one step forward as if to block Briar, then stopped when she realized blocking would look guilty. I nodded once, not to reward Briar, but to acknowledge the witness line had landed. Then I turned back to the staff manager and asked her to log Briar's statement as a neutral witness note, because it directly related to the director's comfort narrative. Kira's fingers resumed moving, and the tapping sound was small but relentless. The staff manager tried to steer the moment away, saying this was not the place for personal matters. I answered calmly that this was exactly the place, because the director had made my attendance a security and comfort issue in the public lobby. If the issue was public, the correction could be public too. Daria crossed the lobby with practiced speed, her expression warm enough to fool anyone who loved polished leadership. She greeted Briar with a bright tone, then turned to me and asked if we could handle this privately. I said no, politely, because I had already tried private, and private was where stories got edited. I held up my slim folder without theatrics and asked Kira to note that I was presenting a one-page ledger summary to clarify why my name was being treated as a risk. Kira nodded once and asked me to place it on the counter so she could mark it received. The staff manager's face tightened again, because received was the word Daria could not erase. Celeste stepped closer and said I was humiliating her, and the donors were watching. I looked at her and kept my tone flat, because flatness denies the performance. I said the only humiliating thing here was the fact that her trip story required a cover name, a badge delay, and a director-driven comfort narrative. I did not accuse her of sex or love or passion, because those words create noise. I accused her of misrepresentation, because misrepresentation is the word institutions cannot ignore without implicating themselves. Grant finally moved, slipping in beside Daria like a man who expected charm to work on paper. He said he did not know why I was doing this and suggested I was upset over a misunderstanding. I opened my folder and placed the one-page ledger on the counter, showing only dates, places, and payments. No commentary, no insults. I asked Grant one calm question, the same knife in a new angle. I asked why my account showed venue charges on nights Celeste claimed hotel sleep, and why the venue was the same one he used for sponsor coordination. His grin died, and he glanced at Daria before he answered, which was answer enough. Daria's voice sharpened slightly, still polite, still public, as she tried to regain control by calling for a recess. I said a recess was fine, but only after Kira stamped the ledger as received and noted that no threats were alleged, only comfort concerns. Kira stamped the sleeve and typed the operational note, her screen reflecting the lobby lights like a tiny courtroom. Daria's face tightened in a way she could not fully hide, because now the charity had two records: evidence received at the donor meeting and evidence received at the gala entrance. Celeste's eyes flashed with panic, and she tried one last pivot, saying she had been under pressure and made mistakes. I asked her calmly to state one true date, just one, about where she slept during the supposed trip week. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then looked at Daria as if waiting for a script. Briar looked away, disgusted, and the donors nearby pretended not to listen while listening harder. Kira typed the silence as refusal to answer when asked for a date, and the refusal became the loudest thing in the lobby. Daria finally nodded to security and told them to release my badge, her tone clipped with forced courtesy. The staff manager handed it over, and the plastic felt weightless in my hand compared to the record we had just created. I did not walk toward the ballroom. I turned slightly toward the lobby crowd and said, in a calm voice, that I would be submitting a written clarification to the board within 24 hours, and I would not participate in any private narrative meetings. Then I looked at Celeste one last time and told her the marriage could not survive a month of coordinated lies, and tonight proved the coordination was real. Celeste reached for my sleeve as if she could snatch the stamp away, and I stepped back without touching her. Daria watched me with a face that finally looked human, not polished, because humans hate being recorded. I walked out into the cold night air, badge still unscanned, and I left them in their warm lobby with their donors, their minutes, and their silence, because silence was the only honest thing they had left.